That was lovely. Thank you so much. So I would like to introduce to you our next speaker. Becca Barger is the nurse practitioner that works with me at the Maple Center, and our new practice name is Integrative Roots. She has a wealth of experience, but I'm going to preserve all of her time for her presentation rather than to go into them in detail. She's going to be talking about it's not you, it's your HPA axis, adrenal and thyroid dysfunction. So please welcome Becca.
Right. Slightly shorter than Doc. I don't know if this camera is on me now. It's just black on here. Oh, that would be why then. There we go. Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming out. So what a wonderful kind of introduction to what we'll be talking about, because what we just did is a very helpful thing for correcting what we're going to talk about here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So um, some of you may be wondering, what is the HPA axis? So today we'll be talking about what is the HPA axis, the different glands and organs involved, different hormones involved, when dysfunction occurs, and ways to restore balance naturally. All right, so we'll talk about what the HPA axis is, how it affects our adrenal and thyroid hormone health. It affects also a lot of the things Doc, I wasn't here for that talk, but probably what she talked about as well, because it does affect our sex hormones also, but not for this talk. And then we'll talk about ways in which you can promote balance in these systems, to feel calmer, think clearer, have more energy. I'm sure we can all remember a day where we did experience that often. So getting us back to where we were then. And maybe that was many, many, many moons ago for some of you. So a little bit about me. I'm a board certified family nurse practitioner, but I do have training in the functional medicine space. I've worked ER, urgent care, primary care, regenerative medicine. I've done in-home primary care, some hospice stuff in there, addiction medicine. So I've done a lot. I've seen a lot. I've experienced a lot, and I think it's given me a very good perspective of just the human condition, what it is to be a human, right? So yeah, so currently working with Doc at the Maple Center, with our practice integrated roots. And next we've got right, the HPA axis. So it's a stress response system, that connects the brain and the body. So a little bit what I think it was Libby, right? What Libby was speaking of, the fight or flight versus rest and digest. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and how that's involved. But the HPA axis is the driver of that stress response system. And so it affects our autonomic nervous system, which is really kind of the nervous system that does all the things in your body that you're not cognitively thinking about yet you're doing. Your breathing, your respiratory rate, your blood pressure, your temperature, all these things that your body is doing wonderfully for you without you having to tell it to, right? Um, Mine's kind of going a little crazy right now, right? I'm up here experiencing some stress, right? But we'll get better as we go through. And so really the biggest thing is it's responding to danger. And so as we see here, there's a guy standing above city, right? And so danger, must be very cautious up there. We need to be on high alert. We need to be very focused. We need to be, paying close attention to what we're doing, very zoned in. This is what a healthy responding stress response looks like, right? This is how people are able to walk across tight ropes in crazy situations. They have a wonderful ability to move in and out of this. Um, and then safety is the other, piece of that. So it also allows us to move into this rest and digest, a space where we feel safety, where we feel calm, where we can relax. All right. So the next thing is the autonomic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic, which is our fight or flight. And there's also some newer research to suggest that freeze and fawn are other responses. So people who kind of just shut down in the middle of confrontation, or a lot of people pleasing, or constantly wanting to not honoring our own boundaries in things, can also be a stress response. These are often seen in people with history of trauma. So we'll touch lightly on that, but just something to keep in mind. It doesn't always look like fight or flight. It can look other ways too. Um, yeah, so one piece of that in times of danger is releasing adrenaline. Also, when we're dealing with chronic stress, often we release more cortisol. Some other things, though, that are going to affect our blood pressure, our heart rate, and allow us to have appropriate response in that moment. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, where we can rest and digest. Also, another term we use is feed and breed. So when our body is able to be in a relaxed state, should have brought my water in here. But when our body is able to be in a relaxed state, that's when we're able to heal and grow and reproduce. When we are in a state of fight or flight or survival, um, our body's not worried about reproducing. We're worried about just staying alive, right? So you can see how constantly being in that fight or flight is going to result in fertility issues or difficulty healing, constant having wounds or sores, lots of different things that can be involved. But um, this is like the furthest upstream that we can possibly be. And a lot of us are chronically having the sympathetic nervous system stimulated over and over and over again. Um, Many of us are in environments constantly where we don't feel safe, whether that's emotionally, physically, whatever. Oftentimes that's our work or our homes. And that's a major issue. And so being able to move back and forth between these states is very important for us to be able to maintain adequate sleep, energy, mood stabilization, fertility, metabolic flexibility, right? Being able to move back and forth between using carbohydrates for energy and using fats for energy. Um, Also important for having confidence, for being able to trust ourselves and make decisions in the world. Important for mental clarity, focus, libido, motivation, lots of things. So when we are not balanced and we're hanging out in one of these systems more than well, ideally we're hanging out in parasympathetic more than sympathetic, but being able to move in and out of these with ease is really the key. And we all probably know people like this. We know people who one thing happens at the beginning of the day and it spirals them the whole rest of the day. Or we know people who something really like that might throw us off happens to someone else and they're like, and can move on throughout their day. So this is kind of a basic example of that. So what's involved in that sympathetic and parasympathetic response? And that would be your HPA axis, right? So the beginning of that HPA, that is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Thank you. That stress response, that can be a little. All right. So your hypothalamus, it's in your brain, and it's responsible for regulating the beginning kind of all of this. And so, like I said, it's kind of in control of all the things you're not, right? Or at least cognitively not in control of. So it releases thyrotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, and corticotropin releasing hormone. Somatostatin, which we might talk about if we got time, and dopamine are all released from the hypothalamus and into the blood and travel to the back of the pituitary gland. And each of those releasing hormones directs the pituitary gland to stimulate the organs that appropriate those things, deal with those things. So then the next thing is your pituitary gland. So it's often referred to as your master gland. So it's the gland that's really turning on and turning off the organs in our body that are producing hormones. And it plays a crucial role in regulating growth, metabolism, reproduction, stress response, and just other essential bodily functions like your heart rate and your blood pressure and those sort of things. Yeah, we talked about how it does that. So it turns on or off your thyroid, your adrenals, your ovaries, your testicles, depending on what you have. And then, so this is a picture here, just kind of a nice visual of starts in the hypothalamus up here. And we get, so these two pathways here will be kind of what we talk about today. So the corticotropin releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland to then stimulate our adrenals. And then the thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland to then stimulate our thyroid. So it looks pretty simple, right? But when we get stressed, chronically involved with that, it can really throw some things off. So adrenal hormones, what hormones are at play here? And yeah, all these things we need in the right balance. And that's really the key. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. Our body is always seeking balance, right? The sympathetic nervous system isn't bad. The parasympathetic nervous system isn't inherently always good, right? We need both. We just need them in a balanced way, right? And same with everything in the body. And so cortisol is one that tends to get demonized often. I'm sure we've all heard about cortisol. If not, I don't want to say you're living under a rock, but maybe. But so cortisol, we call this our stress hormone, right? But we need cortisol. It's also what gives us the ability to respond in stressful situations in order to have appropriately functioning metabolism and immune function and blood pressure regulating appropriately. That's why oftentimes, we get too stressed or things like that. Hormones can do crazy things and we end up passing out so cortisol can kind of play a role in that. And so if you're someone who fatigues easily with exertion, even just minimal exertion, we may have a cortisol issue. So cortisol isn't like stress doesn't always just mean like emotional stress, right? Working out is stress too. And so cortisol, if we work out, our cortisol raises. Usually yoga does the opposite, but we'll talk about that as well. But so just cortisol isn't all bad, right? So too much or too little can lead to significant endocrine dysfunction, which results in a multitude of symptoms we'll talk about later. DHEA there, but DHEA is a precursor to all of our sex hormones. And it's another hormone produced by our adrenals, which are adrenals down here, these little yellow things that sit on top of our kidneys. And so healthy levels of DHEA are associated with just kind of general feelings of overall health and vitality. It's important to have enough DHEA so that we can have enough sex hormones, right? If we don't have the upstream things, it's hard to have the downstream things. But so DHEA converts to androgens, so testosterones, and then converts to estrogens. And the rate and the amount for which that occurs really depends on your age, your biological sex, with some other genetic variances, and then lifestyle habits. So your adrenals do produce a small amount of sex hormones. I don't want people to think that I'm naive to that, but that's not the main place where those are produced. And then aldosterone and adrenaline are also produced in the adrenals. Not quite as relevant to this talk, but aldosterone plays a big role in water regulation and blood pressure regulation. And so having balance there or imbalance there can lead to fluid retention, sex hormone imbalances, and arrhythmias. And then adrenaline, coming down off some adrenaline right now, I think, but plays a major role in our fight or flight response and our stress response. It functions as a hormone and a neurotransmitter to affect different changes in our body as we respond to stress. All right, and then I did want to I'd like this visual because I think this is something that all of us would be kind of interested in understanding. So cortisol, this is where I say it's not all bad. So cortisol, as we see here, is a big driver of our sleep and wake cycles. And so when cortisol is working in our favor, it's helping us get up at the same time every morning without an alarm clock and not being all groggy and like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed. And then when it drops down nicely in the evening, like it does here, we're able to sleep nicely and our melatonin is able to come up when it's supposed to. And all is well in our sleeping world. But what happens to a lot of people is this picture. And instead of, being asleep at the times that we want to be asleep and awake during the times we want to be awake, we're getting this cortisol boost like we should be getting first thing in the morning. We're getting that at noon. And then we're, midnight and wonder why we can't sleep. Our brain is turned on, but our body is tired. And so cortisol is really the driver of that sleep and wake cycle. And so when our sleep is off and we're gaining weight or we feel really fatigued, cortisol could be a big piece of that, which is our big piece of our adrenals. Um, and then there's hormone or thyroid functioning. So the next thing on the cascade of the HPA axis is the thyroid hormone functioning. So thyroid's responsible for producing tetraiodothyronine, which is T4. You all may have some familiarity with that if you've had your thyroid tested. And then also T3. So T4 is metabolically inactive, T3 is metabolically active. So the thyroid produces 80 to 90% T4 and only about 10 to 20% of T3. And so therefore the body must convert the T4 to more T3. So many people have normal functioning thyroids, but a lot of us are struggling with that conversion. And that's one thing that's often missed. And so we may have all the symptoms of thyroid issues. So fatigue, brain fog, constipation, dry brittle nails, hair loss or dry brittle hair, feeling cold all the time, like chilled to the bone. But you go to the doctor and they say, your thyroid looks great. And your thyroid probably does look great. But the conversion of that hormone might not. And so that is something that would be worth considering. So looking at that here, and this is just a diagram. Well, not really coming up too well on here. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's okay. The side things you don't really need to look at. So it's really the big picture here. So you've got the thyroid, and the thyroid produces mostly T4, and then the T4 needs to convert to T3, and then sometimes it will convert over to reverse T3. So reverse T3, um, we'll all have some reverse T3 to some degree, but it drives more down that pathway when we're dealing a lot with stress or trauma or poor diet or really any number of things that are kind of negatively impacting our body. And reverse T3 is not metabolically active. So to convert T4, not metabolically active, to reverse T3, also not metabolically active, and then that binds to our cell down here and does not do anything for us other than competes for those receptor sites with our metabolically active T3. And so we see here why not seeing this picture is really important, or why it could be a detriment to us feeling better, right? So if you can, maybe next time ask your doc if they can at least look at those numbers for you. They might not know what they mean, but that can give you an idea of things that you can do, or you can just try doing the things we'll talk about here in a minute. But moral of the story is there's more to the story with the thyroid picture. And so HPA dysfunction, these are all the different symptoms that can go along with it. Fatigue is a big one, a big one. So back in the day, they used to refer to HPA dysfunction as adrenal fatigue. And we found now that it's not so much your adrenals are tired as much as the signaling from your brain to these organs are tired. And so fatigue is a big piece of this. And oftentimes these people will sleep for long hours and still never feel rested. And like I was saying earlier, that wired and tired feeling, like your brain is turned on and just can't shut it off, but your body is exhausted. So that's things people experience often. Cognitive issues and mental health issues can definitely go along with this. So memory and issues and brain fog, difficulty focusing, task initiation, completing tasks can be difficult. Anxiety and depression can come along with this. Difficulty handling stress, overwhelm, like we've just met our max. And addiction can actually become a big piece of this. A lot of people with addiction issues have HPA axis dysfunction. And so we're dopamine seeking and we're trying to make ourselves feel better. with addictive things. And that can be sugar, that can be food, that can be nicotine, it's not always all the bad stuff, right? I mean, nicotine's not good for you necessarily, but you know what I'm saying. And so addiction, if you feel like you have kind of an addictive personality, you may have some HPA axis dysfunction. And then metabolic issues, weight gain, weight loss. So that's kind of it's all about cortisol balance, not about too much or too little. Or well, it is, too much or too little, but you can have different effects regardless of how you're responding. Um, Constant hunger, blood sugar dysregulation, insulin resistance, and you can have lots of GI issues. So nausea, constipation, bloating, gut dysbiosis, muscle aches, joint pain, and then sexual health issues as well. All right, so moving towards balance, like keeping it very simple, it's about being in spaces where you feel safe. And people think safe, like, are you physically safe? Like, yes, that is a big piece of it. Do you feel physically safe where you're at? But do you feel emotionally safe? Do you feel safe to be who you want to be? Do you feel safe to say the things you want to say? Because if not, like those are environments that I would invite you to be not in as often. Because if we are the way we perceive how we're feeling, the way our brain perceives that is going to control how our HPA axis responds. It starts all the way up here in our amygdala. And so amygdala is the part of our brain tied to emotion that really mindset work can be huge in changing all of this for people. So the amygdala decides, is this a danger or not? And then it sends a signal to the hypothalamus. And so if we can go all the way back and really decide, I don't think that this is that big of a deal, like then it doesn't trigger our HPA axis, right? Like eventually my amygdala is not going to be freaking out about me giving a presentation in front of people. But today it is, right? But eventually we can train that out of me. So a big piece of moving towards balance is stepping away from that danger, finding a way to feel safe in that danger even, right? And so sometimes it means practicing those things that make you feel that, which doesn't feel good. So finding a space where you can be safe feeling danger, right? So right here, I do feel safe feeling this danger. So thank you all. But so that is really a big, big, big piece of this. And so how to support your HPA axis. Obviously, like diet and nutrition is important, and other people will talk about that today who know far more than I do. But important nutrients as far as making sure our adrenals and our thyroid even have the ingredients to make the recipe, right? So adrenal nutrients, vitamin C is huge, B vitamins, magnesium, adequate proteins, and ideally, getting plant-based proteins as much as we can. All things in moderation is my thing, but and then healthy fats, which definitely healthy fats are going to be plant-based fats. Like there's no arguing that. And then adaptogens can support adrenal balance as well. So ashwagandha, rhodiola, cordyceps, ginseng. I wouldn't necessarily like deep dive down those things, especially if you're on other medications without talking to someone who is trained in using those things, like myself or Doc, or some other people who might talk today. But those can be very helpful things in terms of just nourishing that HPA axis. And then thyroid nutrients, iodine, zinc, and selenium are three major ones for production and conversion of that thyroid hormone. B12, vitamin D, iron, omega-3s, and tyrosine can be very helpful as well. And then amygdala retraining. So there are a number of ways we can retrain our amygdala. One of those is yoga that we just kind of, explored. Breath work, deep breathing. I'll be doing some sound bowls here momentarily. So just finding ways to get ourselves into a space where we can experience that, right? That relax, that rest and digest. And finding ourselves in that more often than not is really the goal. And then when we find ourselves in the not rest and digest, moving ourselves back into that or finding these ways to move into that. And so I actually am trained in yoga as well. So that was very helpful for me moving in, doing that before I came into this. But, finding those practices for you that are going to help you move from rest and or that fight or flight into that rest or digest. Um, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm running out of time, but as I mentioned earlier, if you have a history of trauma or things like that, I would highly recommend finding a counselor who is trained in trauma therapy, because talking about your traumas isn't always the best thing in terms of retraining our amygdala, because it's just forcing us to kind of relive that over again. So making sure we find someone who's well equipped for that, which we'll have one of those coming up soon. And then just daily habits, getting sunlight in your eyes and on your skin each day before 9 a.m. That's going to help time the sunlight coming up to that cortisol pulse in the morning. I promise you, you do this for 1 week, take your sunglasses off on your commute to work, or get outside, take a 10-minute walk with your dog before 9 a.m. every day for the next week. And I can almost guarantee you that you'll have a much easier time waking up every day and going to bed at night as well. Moving your body in the morning, that helps clear out adenosine, boost cortisol at the appropriate time of the day. And then waiting an hour to consume caffeine, that has to do with the adenosine as well. We didn't really get time to talk about that. You can do your own research. And then avoiding excess sugar or other refined foods, especially carbs. And so, moral of the story is it's a very complex communication system between the brain and the body in response to external stimuli. Avoiding stressors when possible, creating a life or a routine that promotes feelings of safety, eating a diet high in phyto and micronutrients, and retraining your amygdala to reduce overreactions can be game changing. I didn't put that left that part off, but can really be a huge game changer for people. And it doesn't require a ton of energy and effort. Take showing up for yourself 5 minutes a day, but doing it every day. It's about consistency. It's about telling our body that we're safe in this world, that we can move about and trust ourselves in this world. Because a lot of the world wants to tell us that you don't know better for you. You don't know, you can't possibly know what's good for yourself. And I just want to invite you to take power over your brain and body and move into that feeling of safety and know that you are safe in this world. And that is all. Thank you guys. Oh, wait, I didn't mean to stop share. I need to keep sharing Q&A? Oh, I was going to say I have a few minutes for Q&A and then the sound bowls. Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any questions? I might not have been super clear on everything. No question. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I didn't get a lot of time to talk about. So thank you for that question. I like that. So our hypothalamus, there are cells in our eyes, hypoganglion cells in our eyes that interpret light, right? That see light. And so when the light from the sun hit these cells in our eyes, it sends a signal to our hypothalamus that says, time to wake up. And then it sets a little timer in our brain that says, in 16 hours, it's time to release melatonin. And so that is what sets that clock. And so that's why I say do this for a week. It might mean dragging yourself out, sitting in front of the sun. Now, don't stare directly. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't encourage you to stare directly at the sun. If you can see stuff outside, you're getting light photons in your eyes. But I would definitely invite you for like a week. Try that. Get out. I have a dog, so she kind of gets me out in the morning and go on a little bit walk. But yeah, so it's kind of help set the timer for that circadian rhythm. And so if you show up for that every day, like I said, just for about a week, oftentimes that's enough to really shift that for a lot of people. Now, if you're drinking coffee as soon as you wake up, I would encourage you to wait till you get outside and move around a little bit. The coffee was something I didn't get to talk about, but so in that circadian rhythm, we also have adenosine that builds up in our brain throughout the day. And this is kind of a neuro excited, like a toxin of some sort, And so our body has to clear that out while we sleep. And so when you wake up in the morning and just still feel a little groggy, a lot of what you're feeling is that adenosine, and then you drink your coffee and you're awake. And that's because caffeine hits on those adenosine receptors, rips the adenosine off, and suddenly wakes you up. It takes control. The caffeine does. That's also why, probably around 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you suddenly feel tired again. And that's because that caffeine has worn off, but that adenosine had nowhere to go. So now it binds to those receptors, makes you feel tired, and then it makes your brain think, oh, it must be that time to like start going to bed. And so then your adenosine really kicks up a lot more at that time of day than it really should. And so that's why I always invite people, keep your coffee, like wait an hour after you wake up in the morning so that adenosine can really clear out so you're not creating competition. And then no caffeine after like 1 in the afternoon. But so that can really help with sleep and wake cycles. It can be a very profound difference for a lot of people. But yeah, great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It really just depends person to person. But what I would say, you guys can still see it here. Okay. So actually, let me just share screen again so I can see it on my screen. All right. I think this is the right screen. All right. Let me go back to, went too far, guys. We're almost there. This one. Okay. So as you see here, sunset, and that's when our melatonin is really beginning to peak. And so a lot of people take their melatonin right before bed. But I actually invite people, unless you're taking like 10 milligrams, which is a pretty good dose, I wouldn't necessarily take that super early, but maybe taking 3 milligrams of melatonin at 7 p.m. can really be really helpful in just eliciting kind of a natural moving into sleep. Now, if you're really having an incredibly hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, things like that, you may need more than just melatonin to help you with that. But melatonin, it just really depends from person to person as far as the grogginess profile. I would start at a lower dose. You're going to be less likely to have grogginess in the morning. But some people find that melatonin helps them fall asleep, but it doesn't help them stay asleep. So in that case, an extended release melatonin can be helpful. But those are the ones where sometimes you can run into the grogginess. So difficult to really like give you full assurance one way or the other. But I would say starting at a 3 milligram dose, if you take it at 7 p.m., it's highly unlikely that when you wake up at 7 a.m. the next morning, you're going to be, or maybe, I don't know what time you wake up, but I doubt you'll be struggling too much. And then if you find that 3 milligram doesn't help you, you can slowly bump up. 10 milligrams is what I would recommend for anyone who's not like seeing a practitioner, as far as being safe up to that point. But yeah, does that answer your question? Okay, yeah. Any other questions? If not, I will set up my sound bowls, which is the next thing I'll move into. But I do want to talk a little bit about the sound bowls and kind of how they work. I won't get too crazy sciencey with you, but so if you want to really get crazy sciencey, look up binaural beats online. But essentially, that's what we'll be experiencing with this. So listening to these sound bowls, now these are tuned to like I think what 432 hertz, which is supposed to be a healing frequency, and I don't disagree with that, but that's not what's really going to be helpful in terms of HPA access here. So what these can do is help to move our brainwave state from a more anxious state into a more relaxed, almost like meditative state. And so some people will be like, oh, I got lost in the like wah wah, which is kind of what you may experience with these. So if you find it really like triggering or you don't feel comfortable with it or it doesn't settle well in your body, like I invite you to leave. Like when if like even in the middle of it, if it doesn't feel good, like please just step out. You won't hurt my feelings. Because I live with someone who doesn't enjoy these. So it's not for everyone, but a lot of people do really enjoy it. And what it does is it oscillates the sound. And so a different sound is entering either ear at the same time, which forces our brain to really analyze two things at once, which syncs up the two sides of our brains and helps us get into this more calmer mind, more meditative mind state. And so it can be a very helpful thing for people, even in terms of sleep. NASA uses binaural beats for their astronauts to help induce sleep and power naps. So it's very scientific. This is not total woo-woo, I promise. It just looks like it when we're doing it. But so, all right. Well, I will step over and get that set up. And yeah, so thank you all.